At night, your mind is supposed to turn the world off. Your muscles should soften. Your will should dissolve. But sometimes, the body doesn't get the memo. A door opens in the dark. Bare feet cross a cold floor. A hand grips a handle, too firmly. A voice speaks without waking. And somewhere inside that sleeping brain, a dream is driving, while the person behind the eyes is not even there. Because there is a terrifying question hidden inside aggressive sleepwalking. What happens when consciousness goes offline, but the machinery of action stays on? Sleepwalking is one of those phenomena that sounds almost mythical, like a leftover superstition from a time when people blamed the moon for everything. But in modern sleep medicine, it has a precise name: somnambulism, a type of parasomnia, an unwanted behavior that emerges out of sleep. Most sleepwalking looks harmless. Someone sits up, mutters, wanders, maybe rearranges objects as if completing a task from another life. The truly unsettling version is rarer, but real. Aggressive or violent sleepwalking, when a sleeping person might shove, strike, grab, or react with sudden force, sometimes toward a loved one who tries to guide them back to bed. The person isn't choosing aggression in the daytime sense. It's more like the brain wakes up just enough to move, but not enough to understand. Here's the twist. When people imagine sleepwalking, they often picture someone acting out a dream. But classic sleepwalking usually arises from deep non-REM sleep, particularly slow-wave sleep, N3, where vivid story-like dreaming is generally less common than in REM. Instead of a full cinematic dream, the mind may be trapped in something more fragmentary, a blurred sense of threat, a half-formed goal, a body that must escape, defend, or complete a routine. And that's where the mystery becomes psychological, because aggressive sleepwalking forces a strange question. What part of you is awake when you're not? Your eyes may be open, your body navigates space, your hands can manipulate objects, yet the person you recognize, your reflective self, your moral self, your memory of consequences, may be absent. In the morning, many sleepwalkers have little to no recall, or they remember only a flash, a feeling of danger, a shadowy intruder, the urgency to run. It's also important to separate aggressive sleepwalking from something it can be confused with: REM Sleep Behavior Disorder, RBD. In RBD, the brain fails to keep the body paralyzed during REM sleep, and people may clearly act out vivid dreams, often with punching or kicking. Aggressive sleepwalking, by contrast, usually emerges from non-REM sleep with a different brain state, a kind of partial awakening where motion is possible but awareness is fractured. So why does this matter? Because this phenomenon sits right on the border between sleep and wake, between intention and automation, a border where accidents happen, relationships are shaken, and a person can wake up feeling haunted by actions they didn't author. Aggressive sleepwalking isn't just a sleep quirk. It's a window into how the brain constructs control and what happens when that construction collapses midnight. And if the body can act without the full self present, then maybe you are not as continuous as you feel. To understand aggressive sleepwalking, you have to abandon the comforting idea that behavior always requires a fully awake mind. Psychology, especially modern cognitive science, has spent decades proving the opposite. The brain can initiate complex actions using systems that operate beneath conscious supervision. Aggressive sleepwalking is not simply anger in sleep. It's more accurate to see it as a threat response without a narrator. 1. The mind splits: executive self versus automatic self. When you're awake, your behavior is shaped by an internal hierarchy. At the top sits the executive system: planning, inhibition, perspective-taking, moral evaluation, and the ability to pause and reinterpret a situation. Underneath it are automatic systems: habits, routines, reflexes, and emotional action programs. In aggressive sleepwalking, that hierarchy breaks. The executive system is offline or unstable, while automatic systems are active. The result can look like intention: walking, grabbing, pushing, but psychologically it's closer to procedural behavior driven by emotion and habit. This is why sleepwalkers can navigate familiar spaces. Their brains are running scripts: the hallway, the door, the stairs. They may even perform tasks that resemble waking life, like searching for something, trying to escape, or protecting themselves. But the reflective self, the one that knows what's real, is not fully present. 2. The brain's most ancient story. There's something here. Aggression in sleepwalking often has a theme: intrusion. Many episodes include the vague conviction that there's an intruder, an attacker, a dangerous animal, or an urgent threat in the room. That doesn't always come from a detailed dream like a movie. It can be something more primitive, a fast, blurry sense of danger, generated by the brain's threat detection systems. In cognitive psychology, this resembles a kind of misattribution. The brain generates a body state, arousal, tension, readiness, and then tries to justify it with a story. But in sleepwalking, the story may be partial or distorted. The person might perceive a partner's attempt to help as an attack. A hand on the shoulder becomes an ambush. A voice becomes a command from an enemy. The behavior that follows, pushing, striking, fleeing, can be understood as the enactment of a survival program. Fight or flight, launched without the usual reality check mechanisms. 3. Why aggression often targets the wrong person. This is one of the most heartbreaking elements. The aggression is frequently directed at someone who cares, someone trying to guide the sleepwalker back to bed. Psychologically, that makes sense. In a partially awakened brain, context is degraded. Facial recognition, relationship meaning, and "this is my partner" can fail to register. Meanwhile, the sensory system can still detect movement, touch, and proximity, exactly the cues that the threat system treats as urgent. So you get a tragic mismatch. A loved one approaches with help, but the sleepwalking brain interprets approach as threat. This is not about hidden hostility. It's about faulty interpretation under reduced consciousness, a mind running a defense routine on corrupted data. 4. Stress, sleep deprivation, and emotional overload, fuel for the episode. Aggressive sleepwalking tends to cluster around periods when the brain is stressed or destabilized. From a psychological perspective, several triggers make sense. Sleep deprivation deepens slow-wave sleep and increases rebound pressure, making abrupt partial awakenings more likely. Stress and anxiety keep the nervous system primed, raising arousal thresholds and making threat interpretations more probable. Alcohol and certain medications can fragment sleep architecture, nudging the brain into unstable transitions. Irregular schedules confuse circadian timing, adding yet more instability. Think of it like this. Sleepwalking episodes often occur when the brain is forced to switch states too quickly, like a computer waking from hibernation with half its programs crashing and half still running. 5. Symbolic meaning, but with scientific restraint. It's tempting to interpret aggressive sleepwalking as pure symbolism, a suppressed anger, a shadow self, a hidden violent wish. That's dramatic, and sometimes it fits a person's narrative, but psychology has to be careful. Most evidence suggests that aggressive sleepwalking is not primarily an expression of repressed desires. It's a state problem, not a personality revelation. Yet symbolism can still appear, not because the unconscious is confessing, but because the brain is trying to organize sensation into meaning. If the body is aroused, if the environment is dim, if there's a noise or a touch, the sleeping mind may construct a threat explanation. That explanation might borrow imagery from personal fears: burglars, monsters being chased, being trapped. The content may reflect emotional themes in the person's life: pressure, insecurity, conflict. But the mechanism is still rooted in partial awakening plus threat bias. So instead of saying, "the sleepwalker is acting out rage," a more grounded psychological framing is, "the brain is in a fragmented state. The threat system is overactive. The interpretation system is underpowered. The motor system is surprisingly available. The result is defensive action without full awareness." 6. The most disturbing insight: agency is not binary. aggressive sleepwalking confronts us with a disturbing psychological truth. Agency is not an on-off switch. There are gradients, layers, partial access. A person can be capable of movement, speech, and complex navigation while lacking self-awareness, coherent memory formation, and moral reasoning in the waking sense, which means that you are not a single ruler inside your skull. You are a coalition, and at night sometimes the coalition fractures and the part that protects the body takes control without asking permission. That's the psychological core of aggressive sleepwalking. A protective machine running in the dark, mistaking the world for danger and turning familiar rooms into a battlefield built from shadows. To see why aggressive sleepwalking can happen, imagine the brain at night not as a single sleep switch, but as a city where different districts can light up at different times. In healthy sleep, the city follows rules. During deep NREM sleep, especially N3, slow-wave sleep, the cortex produces large, synchronized delta waves, a signature of widespread downshifting. Conscious, reflective awareness becomes faint, reaction speed slows, memory encoding changes. And yet, deep sleep is not uniform. It can be patchy. 1. The core mechanism, partial arousal plus state dissociation. Most aggressive sleepwalking is classified under NREM parasomnias, often called disorders of arousal. The key idea is incomplete awakening. The brain tries to transition from deep sleep to wakefulness but doesn't finish the job. Neuroscientists describe this as state dissociation, a hybrid condition where some circuits behave awake-like, while others remain in deep sleep mode. That's how you can get a paradox. Motor systems can engage, walking, grabbing, pushing. Sensory processing is partially online. Light, touch, movement are detected. But the prefrontal cortex, the region heavily involved in judgment, inhibition, and reality testing, remains underactive, like a control tower that never fully wakes. So behavior is possible, but supervision is missing. 2. The sleep stage. Why N3 is a high-risk zone. Deep slow-wave sleep is usually most intense in the first third of the night. That timing matters because many sleepwalking episodes happen exactly there. N3 sleep is stable until it isn't. When something disrupts it, noise, fever, stress, sleep deprivation, alcohol, irregular schedule, the brain may trigger an arousal. But if the arousal stalls halfway, you get movement without full awareness. Sleep deprivation is especially important. It increases pressure for slow-wave sleep, making N3 deeper and paradoxically more prone to unstable awakenings. It's like tightening a spring. When it releases, it can release violently. 3. What the brain looks like during an episode. We can't routinely record full brain activity during a sleepwalking episode in the wild, but lab studies using EEG and brain imaging suggest a striking pattern, a mosaic brain. Some studies have reported that during NREM parasomnias, regions linked to movement and emotion show increased activity. Regions linked to self-awareness and executive control show reduced activity. Imaging work, including SPECT in certain documented cases, has pointed toward greater activation in areas involved in motor planning and emotional drive, while parts of the frontal cortex appear comparatively offline. The exact maps vary across individuals, but the theme is consistent. The brain is not uniformly awake or asleep. That mismatch is the neurological foundation for why an episode can look purposeful while being profoundly unintentional. 4. Why aggression can appear. Threat circuits without full context. Aggression isn't inserted into the brain like a switch. It emerges when defensive circuitry is triggered under ambiguity. During partial arousal, the brain can misinterpret sensory input. A partner's touch becomes a sudden threat. A shadow becomes an intruder. A voice becomes a command. In this state, circuits involved in salience detection, deciding what is urgent, can dominate. The body becomes ready to protect itself. But without a fully online frontal system, the brain's ability to reappraise, wait, it's just my room, just my partner, is weakened. You get a nervous system screaming danger inside a mind that can't fully fact-check. 5. REM versus NREM, the critical distinction. This is where confusion often happens. REM Sleep Behavior Disorder, RBD, is different. It occurs during REM sleep, when dreams are typically vivid and story-like, and the normal REM muscle paralysis fails, allowing dream enactment. Aggressive sleepwalking, on the other hand, usually comes from NREM slow-wave sleep, where the episode is less acting out a movie and more like a malfunctioning transition, a brain waking in fragments. Both can involve violence, but their biology and their implications are not the same. 6. The nighttime fault line. If you had to summarize the neuroscience in one cinematic line, it would be this. Aggressive sleepwalking happens when the brain's borders break. When the engine can start, the wheels can turn, but the driver isn't fully in the seat. And in that borderland, half sleep, half wake, the body may defend itself against a world it doesn't correctly recognize. If aggressive sleepwalking feels like a horror premise, science has treated it like something else entirely, a boundary failure, measurable, classifiable, and in rare cases, forensically consequential. 1. How common is violence during sleep? Really? One of the most cited large-scale population studies on this topic was led by Maurice Ohayon and colleagues, examining violent behaviors during sleep across the general population. Their results support a crucial point. Nighttime violence isn't a single disorder. It can appear across multiple conditions, including NREM arousal parasomnias like sleepwalking and confusional arousals, and also REM-related disorders. But the study's deeper message is even more unsettling. When violence happens at night, it often clusters with factors that fragment sleep: stress, irregular schedules, other sleep disorders, and sometimes medications, conditions that increase the probability of the brain slipping into that unstable, half-awake state. 2. What sleep labs actually capture? You might wonder, can researchers see this happen? Sometimes yes, though it's difficult because the episodes are unpredictable. In sleep laboratories, clinicians may use polysomnography, EEG, breathing, muscle tone, video monitoring, and try to provoke episodes ethically by manipulating known triggers, like sleep deprivation or forced awakenings from deep sleep. What they look for is not a dream acting out, but the signature of NREM parasomnia, an arousal from deep NREM sleep with confused behavior and impaired awareness. Modern clinical reviews of adult disorders of arousal emphasize that episodes can become complex in adulthood and may include potentially harmful behaviors, precisely because adults have stronger motor capacity and more complex environments. 3. The why. Models, a scientific bridge between brain and behavior. Because aggressive sleepwalking is rare and emotionally charged, researchers have tried to model it without sensationalism. A notable example is a biopsychosocial model proposing that violence during sleepwalking emerges from a convergence of vulnerability factors: impaired perception during episodes, reduced higher-level control, like impulse inhibition, and hyperreactivity of lower defensive systems, especially when the environment adds confusion, touch, noise, sudden proximity. This is important because it reframes the phenomenon. Not a violent person, but a sleep state vulnerability that can produce violent reactions under the wrong conditions. 4. The cases that forced medicine to speak in court. Sleepwalking becomes truly chilling when it escapes the bedroom and enters the courtroom. One of the most famous cases is R.V. Parks in Canada, which reached the Supreme Court of Canada. The central question wasn't sensational, at least in legal terms. It was clinical. Can sleepwalking qualify as automatism, meaning complex behavior performed without conscious control? The court record documents the legal reasoning around sleepwalking as a disorder of sleep rather than a chosen act. Cases like this are why sleep medicine developed strict forensic caution. Clinicians must rule out substance intoxication, psychiatric causes, malingering, and nocturnal seizures. The evaluation is not based on a single test, but on a converging picture: history, triggers, family reports, timing of episodes, and, when possible, sleep study evidence. 5. The mirror case, when it's not sleepwalking at all. Here's where science protects credibility. Many violent sleep stories are not NREM sleepwalking. A landmark clinical paper by Schenk and colleagues, 1986, helped define REM Sleep Behavior Disorder, RBD, a condition where REM's normal muscle paralysis fails, allowing dream enactment behaviors that can include striking or kicking. Why does that matter for your video? Because the public often collapses everything into sleepwalking. But clinicians must separate NREM parasomnias, partial arousal from deep sleep, confused, fragmented perception, from RBD, REM dream enactment, vivid dream recall, different physiology and implications. That distinction is not just academic. It changes diagnosis, risk assessment, and treatment direction. 6. The quiet horror of the evidence. When you place the studies beside the cases, a pattern emerges. Aggressive sleepwalking is rare, but real. It's not a supernatural possession. It's not hidden evil. It's a human brain caught between operating systems, capable of movement, stripped of meaning, defending against a world it cannot correctly recognize. And that is what makes the documented evidence so haunting. The episodes don't prove monsters exist in dreams. They prove the mind can temporarily lose authorship of the body. In the morning, the person who sleepwalked aggressively often wakes up into a quiet kind of horror, not the horror of a monster in the dream, but the horror of a blank space where authorship should be. Because aggressive sleepwalking forces us to confront something we usually refuse to see. The mind is not a single, uninterrupted I. It's a layered system. Habits, reflexes, emotional alarms, memory fragments, and a fragile executive voice that normally ties it all together. Most nights, that voice returns cleanly when you wake, but on some nights, the brain rises halfway, and the body becomes a moving answer to an ancient question. How do you survive when you don't fully know where you are? If you've ever jolted awake from a dream with your heart racing, you've tasted the raw chemistry of fear without context. Aggressive sleepwalking is what happens when that chemistry finds a body that can stand up and act, while the part that says, "This is real, this is not, this is my home, this is my life," remains submerged. So the mystery isn't that the sleeping brain can create worlds. We already know it can. The mystery is that the sleeping brain can sometimes borrow your hands, borrow your voice, borrow your momentum, and leave you the next day staring at the edges of yourself, wondering where you truly begin. And maybe that's the quiet lesson hidden inside strange dreams and broken awakenings. Sleep doesn't just restore the mind, it reveals how many minds you actually are.